Welcome back to another episode of Spiritual Teachers Podcast. With me today is Mariah Ganesa, calling in from Nevada City. Mariah is the founder of Four Visions, and it's such an honor to have you on today, Mariah. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me, Peter. I'm really happy to be here.
We got a beautiful episode for everyone today. We're going to talk about Mariah's awakening journey. We're going to talk about her work with plant medicine, different types of plant medicine, some that you may have not heard of before. We'll talk about conscious entrepreneurship and family and integration with medicine in that regard as well. So I'm really excited, Mariah. Would you be open to sharing how your awakening journey started?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you for having me again. I'm really happy to be here with the spiritual teachers community and listeners. And my story starts in a moment of suffering and disconnection, as many awakening stories do, and the need to find a different way. And so I was born and raised in Northern California. I grew up in Northern California, had a really privileged middle-class upbringing, and by the time I was about 16 years old, I was in a tremendous amount of pain and suffering and really experiencing disconnection from my body, confusion, distortion as a young woman, and really just lacking inspiration and understanding of what I was doing here on this planet. I had spent a good portion of my adolescence kind of chasing this dream that had been sold to me as far as what success is and what achievement is, and had really pushed very hard in the academic world so that by the time I was 16, I graduated from high school at the top of my class 2 years early with a full ride to UCLA. And so I was really on this path of, academic achievement because I had kind of told myself and believed the conditioning that I'd been given that through external achievement, I would be able to prove myself because I didn't really believe in myself and who I was as I was. And so it was this disconnect and this lack of worthiness that I felt inherently within myself that was really pushing me to kind of go out there and prove myself. And so by that point, it was the summer before I went to Los Angeles to start studying. I was at a point in my life where something had to give. It was just no longer feeling true and sustainable for me. And I was in a lot of pain. I was a lot of mental suffering, maybe not the type of suffering that we think of when we think of war or strong traumas. It was little trauma that had accumulated over the course of my 16 years and had left me feeling pretty fragmented as a being and pretty disconnected from who I was and from my heart and from nature, from my essence. And so it was from that place that I found medicine, the medicine of nature, the medicine of healing, and plant medicine specifically came into my life that summer before I went to college and changed the course of my life forever. And so I was invited to go on a special road trip with my older brother, and he actually was the one who invited me and introduced me to plant medicine. And the first ceremony that I had a chance to sit in was with ayahuasca. And I remember that first ceremony being like a huge wake up call for me, and like feeling this innocence and beauty and joy kind of just for the first time in many, many years, and waking up on the medicine in the forest and being surrounded by butterflies and bird song and just hearing the trickling of water. We were on a magical island off the coast of Washington, and it was everything was alive and beautiful, and it was just this fairy tale journey. And I remember opening my eyes and feeling connected with nature for the first time in many years, and seeing how everything was connected and I was connected, and that I wasn't this separate fragmented being and soul kind of floating through space, but rather was part of the greater design of life. And I felt a peace, a deep peace and completion or understanding of my place for the first time in many years, which brought a tremendous amount of like relief and deep acceptance of life and who I was that I was deeply yearning for. And so that moment changed everything for me. I ended up continuing on to college, but by then my life had been turned on to the healing power of plants and spirituality and the healing path as a whole. And so I was very, very curious and started just kind of exploring as much as I could in many different modalities: yoga, meditation, health and wellness, cleansing, organic food, everything that I could kind of get access to at that time, and continuing to drink medicine and work with plant medicine as it was available to me. And so, yeah, it was that first year of college where that was all kind of put to the test, because I had kind of been given a new chance to experience life in a completely different way, and then kind of went back into the Maya, or the illusion of the dream that I had been sold. And it was a period of, it was a little rocky trying to make sense of it and see where those two worlds collide. And college is the right path for a lot of people. For me, it ended up being a place where I felt suffocated by the dream that no longer felt true to the essence of my heart that I was discovering. And I felt really called to the path of healing, and I started to understand that I had a lot of healing to do, and kind of just start to break the surface of what that might be about and what there was for me to uncover there. And so I took a leap of faith, and after that first year of school, I called up my parents and I told them that I wanted to leave and that I was not going to be coming back. And I definitely broke my grandmother's heart that day. It really was like really hard for my grandparents to come to terms with why I would be walking away from this full ride, paid for education that they never got, that they wanted for me so badly. And it was this moment of really choosing to live my life for me and not for anyone else, even my most beloved family, but that this life that I had been given was mine. And the best way that I could live it was from that place of purpose and intention and listening to my heart. And so that was really kind of what started my journey and my searching. And it's been about 15 years, I guess. Yeah, 15 years since I took that leap of faith. And looking back, I don't regret it for an instant, because what transpired after I walked away from that experience at college was the most magical healing decade and a half of my life that my soul had been deeply, deeply yearning for. And yeah, it's been an incredible journey of healing, evolution, remembrance, coming home, and really just getting started. But basically through this prayer of intent of wanting to discover who I was and wanting to go deeper from that initial layer of consciousness and awakening, I was led to Colombia, where I met my teacher, a traditional botanist and healer from the Ingano tribe and traditions of Putumayo, Colombia. They're one of the 5 tribes of Yahe, which is the Colombian form of Ayahuasca. And I entered into a decade-long apprenticeship in the healing arts and in the ancestral botanical traditions and herbalism and plant medicine healing of their culture. And yeah, I've kind of started this voyage of remembering who I am and why I'm here, and in the process finding my place within my ancestral inheritance and understanding how I am continuing to weave the tapestry of my ancestors. And the work that I'm here to do, little by little, started to become clearer to me as I healed myself. And healing is nonlinear and ever expanding, so it's definitely always present in my life and in my experience of this life. The healing path never ends, but there was a period of deep years of healing, transformation, shedding and letting go, and then kind of a embodiment, empowerment, and opening up of service, of how to continue forth in this process of sharing what I had received with the world. And yes, little by little, step by step, I've just been continuing the journey for the last 15 years or so. And parents, my ancestors and my elders always teach me like to be humble on this path, and it is a long journey. And so one could think that 15 years is a long time, but it's really just a blink of an eye in terms of the process of spiritual maturation and evolution.
For sure.
And yeah, really just feel like such a baby still. So yeah, I'm just getting started.
For sure, for sure. I can relate with a lot of that. So up till now, it's probably been, would you say like hundreds of times you've sat with Mother Aya,
Uh-huh.
Grandmother
Yeah.
Aya? Yeah.
During my apprenticeship, we were drinking sometimes every 8 days is kind of how they do in the tradition. So
Hmm.
yeah, many, many, many nights of ceremony.
And in Colombia, do they do dietas like they do in Peru?
Our dietas are different. They have a different structure. It's not so much about dieting a specific plant, although there are diets that include particular plant allies that form pillars or anchors of the container. But what our diets are more focused around a particular prayer or spiritual fortitude or skill, spiritual skill that we're developing. So we often diet the thoughts and the mind, and there are different aspects of the diet that make up the discipline and the structure from which we're able to weave that tapestry of evolution and maturation.
Okay. And are you able to share what spiritual skill you were working on?
I've done many diets along
Okay.
the years.
Okay.
So to give a little bit more context, for the Yahe cultures, the diets are incredibly important. So we diet before we drink medicine, we'll diet after we drink medicine. If we're in periods of integration, the integration is also part of the diet. And so the integration itself, whether it be the initial 2 weeks after working with the medicine or a month or even a 6-month integration process, all of those different periods can be a diet. And so it could be like a 6-month integration process coming home from a deep journey where you spend 6 months with very specific intentions of integrating the lessons and the teachings that the medicine brought back to you into your life. And during those 6 months, there are certain commitments and disciplines that you incorporate: spiritual payments, fasting, plant baths, and meditations, and different ways that we basically give something up in order to receive. So it's this practice of strengthening of spiritual will and discipline. So, for example, someone might do a diet to find greater self-love within themselves. And in that diet, they do an investigation into the inner child and healing like the wounds of abandonment or lack of worthiness within them. And in that diet, there's like certain mind and thought patterns that we are dieting. We're avoiding, for example, inner criticism or thoughts that we're not good enough. And every time that one of those thoughts surfaces, we diet that thought by not engaging in it and actively, consciously choosing to feed ourselves a different thought. And then on top of that, we're working with different plant allies that support this container of self-love and self-acceptance and returning to the inner child, healing the inner child, working with plants like bobinsana or sweet plants like basil that help to bring soothing energy and sweet energy and soften the grief or the trauma or the deep wounds that have fragmented our sense of self and sense of acceptance of self. So the way the diet is structured is a little different than the Peruvian traditions, where you're often, in a casita or isolated in the forest, drinking one plant medicine every day, sitting with yourself and studying in that way the medicine of that particular plant. But rather, our diets are spiritual containers where we work on a specific theme within a period of 2 weeks, a month, or longer, with the intention of bringing resolution, healing, understanding, and receiving the wisdom and insights and information from that particular study and whatever plant teachers that we're learning from within the container.
Okay. Okay. That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So from your 10, 15 years of working with different plants and being so immersed in that culture and in the jungle, what what were some of your biggest experiences or biggest takeaways, biggest lessons that would be really beneficial for the world to hear?
Mm. Wow, yeah, there's so many I could like go into so many different chapters and lessons that I learned along the way, sometimes hard lessons and ones that were really hard to swallow, humbling lessons, moments that have had me on my knees begging for just relief or just opening clarity. But I guess, like to mention I've had the honor and the privilege of spending a lot of time with Indigenous peoples, and that has greatly shaped my perspective on life because I have had the opportunity to see the way in which they perceive life. And a lot of traditional cultures, they have a different psyche, they have a different way that they perceive life. And so over time, that has greatly impacted and shaped my own view of life. And I think that by now I feel more Indigenous than not, just because of the values that I've developed within me, how I'm raising my child, the way that we are as a family in my home, and the way that we interact with nature. And the values that I have developed have really been inspired very much by my time spent with the Indigenous cultures and traditional peoples. And there's so many things that make, an Indigenous cosmology different or unique from the colonized society. But a few things that are really come to mind is one, the way in which Indigenous cultures view life as interconnected. And so there's this universally across traditional cultures, there's this deep understanding that we are all part of life and that we are inherent part of all of creation. And so we're not separate, and that unity with all the elements of nature, with all the spirits of the trees, with the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the stone people and all the elements of creation, and that we are part of that greater design, is so much different than the colonized perspective of seeing life as separate from us, and that we are all individual and everyone for themselves, and the survivalist mentality and willing to beat down the neighbor next to us to get ahead. And these types of viewing of life is just not present in the traditional person's psyche because of this deep understanding of oneness and universality. So that has really shaped me and been a big part of my values. And another aspect is also the relationship with nature too, and not seeing nature as a resource to be extracted or to be utilized, but rather as a blessing that, number one, we're part of, we are nature. And then number two, that what a part of our role as human beings is to guard and steward and protect Mother Earth. And so that principle is found universally again across all Indigenous cultures and peoples, and very separate from the Western society. And of course, these two elements that I'm sharing, a lot of people on this podcast probably already have this integrated within the way that our values are, but it's important to make that distinction that it is actually an inherent belief or viewpoint to Indigenous peoples rather than our society as it has developed in the last 300 years. So those two elements have definitely, and so many more lessons and teachings I've learned from spending time with my elders and learning about how to walk a spiritual path sustainably and how to walk in right relationship have just been plethora of blessings that have transformed my life in so many ways. I could probably talk for the rest of the podcast about different life lessons that I've learned through walking the path of the medicines, because it's literally every week that's the spirits of nature are teaching and informing my life. And it's a great blessing and gift, and never ending.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, yeah, we could go in a lot of directions with that. What wants to come through right now, I think, is I'm noticing a lot in the spiritual community. People will sit with ayahuasca, they'll kind of go into that video game, or they won't. Like, when I say video game, I mean they'll have all these experiences, right? And then from there, it seems like the integration piece, hasn't been as prevalent and as important in a lot of these communities that I've witnessed and people have told me about around the country and around the world, where people think it's a way to grow and expand, but then if they're not able to integrate those different layers of themselves, then it's like they're just kind of going into this video game, right?
Yeah, or just feeding the ego. And
Right.
so it can be tricky. And I think that something that um, well, for example, everyone has seen the person who has drank medicine or gone to 100 ceremonies, whatever, dozens of ceremonies, and like they're not a very good person, right?
Right.
Everyone knows that person, and
Right.
when you see someone like that, it's natural that it might bring up some doubt about these sacred medicines. Like if they are so powerful and healing, like why is that person such a terrible partner, or why are they like completely checked out from their kid and not parenting with present, like all these things we start to like judge and perceive. But it's also just like a natural reaction of curiosity when we're trying to understand what the medicines do and if how they work.
Right.
And so that's where this aspect of integration, which has become a very hot topic over the years, comes into play. And it's not necessarily the medicines always work. The medicines always provide healing. And I say that from many, many years of not only my own personal healing journey, but accompanying hundreds and hundreds of people over the course of my decade-long apprenticeship, and watching people come from all over the world to work with us and to do very deep work. The medicine has a way of clearing the crystal of our beings and leaving us clear, pure, connected, and whole in that moment. But if we don't sustain that connection to source, then the crystal becomes muddied very quickly again. And we can literally reinstate the trauma and the wounding and the behaviors and the patterns right back where they were, to the point where like the very next day we can go back to the same habits that the medicine did reorganize for us. And so it requires a conscious partnership with the medicine and in our healing journey and in our commitment to transformation. And that's why they say that the medicine, the ceremony is 50%, and what happens when we go home is the other 50%. And so anyone who thinks that you can just go to a ceremony and your life will be changed and you don't have to do anything besides drink that cup of medicine is sorely mistaken, because that's just not how the design of these sacred plants was given and trusted to the human civilization thousands of years ago. It's never been like that. One thing I would say is that for Indigenous communities, before the medicines came out of the rainforest and were being shared with the global population in this way, is that integration wasn't really a thing because they were integrated. They were living integrated. So this is definitely something new, where within the landscape of the globalization and experiences of plant medicine across borders and countries, and just the rapid cultural exchange that has taken place over the last 3 or 4 decades, with that comes this very interesting thing where you send someone into an experience, a massive healing experience, and then they get displaced or placed back into their previous reality, surrounded by people who have no context of the experience that they just went through. And there is like this fragmentation that takes place of trying to make sense of what just happened to me and how do I make sense of it within the reality that's around me. And that experience is unique to the Western civilization, because the indigenous communities, when they were living in tribes, they would go to their maloka to drink the medicine and then go back to their huts and their casitas, and that was 500 feet away from the main maloka in the village, and then they just lived there together, day
Right.
by day. And so the integration wasn't such a big hot topic because they were living life integrated and they were living together and supporting one another in that process and in the journeys and in the regular ceremonies as well as in the day-to-day life. And so because of our lifestyles and the way that we live in such an isolated way today, that gives way to this kind of fractured experience where someone like goes and travels to experience this medicine and then goes back into their reality with people all around them that have no reference point for the experience that they just went through, which does make things very difficult. However, going back to that example of that person who just isn't walking their talk and is just like this walking red flag, essentially, of like example of what the medicines do but shouldn't do, but creates just more confusion than clarity and inspiration for people. I think that that is something that, with a lot of compassion, we have to look at each one of us who walk the path of the plants and take a level of radical responsibility with our own spiritual processes and work with the medicine so that we don't become that person, and so that we can really be in right relationship with the plants and be very committed to our healing and our spiritual evolution and maturation processes, understanding that it's not like a linear climb. Is like there's valleys and peaks, and it's very much this journey of healing, awakening, and evolution. And it's not about perfection by any means, but it's about showing up and doing our work. And so I asked one time my teacher at the time, what can we do as Westerners to give back to the Indigenous communities who have opened their homes, their cultures, their lands, their peoples, their songs, their traditions to us? And I was expecting him to give an answer related to either sacred reciprocity, financial giving back, supporting, something like concrete for the Western mind. And his response to me was, the very best way you can give back to the cultures that are giving you this healing experience is by doing your work. And through your healing, your true healing and transformation, this is the very best way to honor the medicines and honor the culture. And that has stayed with me, of course, and really been the framework from which I walk my path and hope to inspire others to walk with this perspective, because it's very impactful. And I think if we all take it from that lens of radical responsibility, then the landscape of plant medicine takes on a whole other energy and feeling within the Western culture, and can be something that's really done with a lot of reverence and respect for the healing journey, and not so much the shiny sequins and colorful visions and lights and the distraction that the ego likes to kind of play with, but rather from the nitty gritty, like get down to in the mud and like find the lotus and really bring it home into the altar of the home and into our families and into when we're cleaning our houses or doing dishes or getting our kids ready for school. Like in those moments, that consciousness seeps through and is like really the backbone of the frequency that we're emitting through those moments and through the way that we're doing life. So
Right. Yeah, I that's beautifully said. I love that. And in terms of your personal integration or integration that you've helped others with, what do you find is most impactful and most relevant for people to integrate after ceremony?
yeah, that's a good question. The medicine shows us what we can be when we are fully connected, inspired, empowered, embodied. And the medicine does a really great job at showing us our capacity, and so in that way the medicine serves as a really great like thermometer or temperature check for like where we have the potential to go. And so I think with integration, one of the most important tools is to take the visions, the teachings, the insights, the clarity that we receive with the medicine and bring it down to the 3D reality of what's in front of us today. And so within that, the medicine can show us a gift or a project or something that we're destined to do. And that's very beautiful. And I think when it comes down to integration, it's like integration is all about how to get from A to B. And so for a successful integration, it's to really be able to break down the steps in between and to really be able to look where we want to go based off of the experience we have with the medicine and start chipping away with dedication and discipline little by little at all the little micro steps that are going to get us there. So for example, in the medicine, in the ceremony, we feel like a goddess, empowered, radiant beauty, right? Like total love and bliss. And that's amazing. And then 3-4 days later, we're wondering like, why do I feel like shit about myself, or why don't I feel like that same energy? And we're like maybe eating poorly, or we're like consuming media in a way that's like just kind of distracting or lowering our energy and our connection or our intuition, or maybe we're engaging in like toxic relationships or interactions. So we're doing things that actually like take us away from that goddess bliss or whatever the experience was, right? So I think that integration is really all about seeing where we want to get to. And when we're on the medicine, when we're with these sacred medicines, the medicine does a really great job at showing us what life can be like all the time.
Right.
And then we have to go and we have to apply the step-by-step actionable steps that are going to get us to living like that every day in every moment. And so that means starting to eat better. That means starting to restrict our screen time. That means starting to be aware of like what types of relationships I have in my life and who the people I allow close to me in my inner circle are, and all the different steps that make up part of a thriving version of myself. And so that's kind of, I think, if I was to sum up integration, that's kind of that baseline. Everyone needs this in their integration process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there, I mean, I think going into nature is something really powerful for people to do, right? When they come back, and just wherever you can find nearby, I find that that's really helpful. Also journaling, right? Like trying to stay in the body too, right? Like moving the body, sweating, as well as those pieces that came through during the medicine, right? Like how can that really be integrated, literally like brought into my life, where when I go to Vision Quest, they say, how long are you going to take to forget? Right? Like, how long can you stay in that frequency, basically? How long can you remember what this is really about?
Yeah.
And it's sad sometimes, because I'll see people even in Vision Quest coming out and going right back to grabbing a beer or smoking a little bit of weed or doing whatever they do to dissociate. And I'm like, okay, now I can see why these people might need something more intense to really shake them up and show them like, hey, this isn't working anymore. This isn't aligned with your highest truth and your highest path. And for some people, I think they need that little bit of extra of an experience. But for those that get it the first time, I think it can be much more gentle and soothing and more of a feminine experience. But it's different every time and for every person, depending on what they're moving through. Everybody has their own experiences. I think we're in Earth School, and just just like yourself, I remember being in school thinking like, man, there's something after this. I just got to get through this piece, right? And like always super connected to nature, always wanting to like find people that were like that. There wasn't that many in my surroundings, and then finding indigenous cultures and seeing how that's just interwoven into their way of being and life, and now being like, okay, so this is a way of living, and I can live like this and be an example of this, as well as find others that are living like this. And that to me is really beautiful, because I think a lot of cultures are just going more and more of like, what can we do to make more money? What can we do to be more successful in this reality? And then it's like, okay, but what's the core of it? Is there joy? Is there, you know what I'm saying? Like, is this life fulfilling for that individual?
Totally. Yeah, you're touching on a lot of important points in the process, because I think that's a very common question that people ask along the journey is like, first they heal themselves, they get rid of some of that initial angst and just disconnect, and they start to feel good and connected, and they wake up, they're like, this reality, this life that I built for myself is actually like so far from resonant to this truth that I recently rediscovered. And so that's also part of the integration process, like finding that coherence between, yeah, this new version of ourselves and our service and our purpose and the way that we're able to show up in this world. And so, yeah, that's definitely a big part of, I think, the evolutionary journey of remembrance that so many of us are on.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I We only have a little bit of time left. It feels like we're just getting started with the conversation, right? I mean, we can touch a little bit on conscious entrepreneurship. I would love to see and hear your perspective on that. I work with several conscious businesses, and I find that in those ways, there's every conscious business has their own ways of weaving and navigating, and there's these pieces that come in from the matrix, and then that shifts. And so I'm so curious how your approach to it is with Four Visions.
Yeah, I love it. I love this topic because it's been a big part of how I apply all of the healing and the spiritual work that I get to do is in my career and in like my business that I built. And I didn't start out looking to build a business, and I don't have a business background. I told you I'm a college dropout. So it's definitely been a huge investigation process of learning along the way, of learning the skills that I need to continue forward, of leadership, building a team, and learning how to, yeah, inspire a team of people to build this initiative together. And then the conscious piece is something that has, of course, been the backbone and primary lens of focus as I've walked this path of entrepreneurship, because I started Four Visions and we were getting started. Our official year was 2020. So it's been our 7th year, I guess, of business. But along the way, I was already very deep into my spiritual journey at that point. So I wasn't about to start something that was just like focused on selling people things that would make them more sick.
Yeah.
But we built this platform initially as a way to give back to the Indigenous communities that had really taken me in personally. It was kind of like I was inspired to do something to support them and to be able to provide some stable economic support to the villages that really had taken me in like family and had just been true, so kind and open-hearted to me, and played a fundamental role in my healing journey. So that was inspired from that place, and we continue to develop, build, and cultivate these really special relationships and partnerships with about 15 different Indigenous communities throughout Brazil and Colombia, Peru, Guatemala, Mexico. And one thing that has been so beautiful that has come out of this is like a blueprint that I think can truly be applied to any type of business, not just a plant medicine company, but rather any business that wants to do business in a conscious way can apply these principles that we've kind of developed along the way. And it's really based on integrity and based on doing something that is good for the planet, that is good for humanity, and that is in deep commitment to the greater prayer of healing for the consciousness and for the global tribe of human beings that exist. And so in order to do that, in order to build a conscious business, we have to look at all the different areas in which our business uses resources, cares for the planet, uses what type of packaging we use, how do we take care of our employees, are they well cared for, are they well paid, do they get a living wage, are sourcing ethical, sustainable, is the way that we're sourcing the products or the medicines, in our case, something that is supporting the local communities in right relationship. We have developed for us this like beyond fair trade model, where beyond just like the economic exchange of goods that we have with our partners, we donate a large percentage of funds back to the communities that we work with every year. And we've donated this year we'll hit $1.5 million that we will have donated to the Indigenous communities that we're in partner with. But
That's
that can
awesome.
happen. Thank you. Yeah, it's something we're really proud of. But that element of giving back is like an important aspect for any conscious business, not just for people who are working in the plant medicine space, but if you're selling, I don't know, supplements or blue blogging glasses or whatever you're selling, or if it's not a product-based company, if it's a services-based company, doing it from this place of integrity, of making sure that everyone in the ecosystem that is either engaging, receiving the products or the services, or executing and facilitating them, anyone within the supply chain, that everyone is well cared for, and that there's harmony, reciprocity, and abundance in all the different stages of the business and of the commerce or of the capitalistic structure that you've created. And a lot of people in the spiritual community, they have like either like a fear of money or a distaste of capitalism or consumerism, or there's a lot of judgment to the whole like entrepreneurship or just making abundance for yourself if you're spiritual. And I've kind of really learned along the way that it's the complete opposite, because the more abundance in your life, the more access you have for greater impact, and the more you can be in service to more people. And so when done from this lens and framework, you start to really be a change maker and really be able to facilitate conscious shifts in everything from the consumerist mindset to the health and consciousness of the global population. It's amazing the amount of impact that we can have through this type of conscious business. And so it's something actually I've become really passionate about over the years, not intentionally, but as we developed this model for ourselves, I started naturally consulting or counseling my friends who were in different areas of business and starting to see how easily this model or blueprint could be replicated and incorporated. And people who had businesses that were struggling have been able to implement some of these foundational principles and see a lot of beautiful movement, energetic movement that comes, abundance or opening, energetic opening that can happen when you start to incorporate some of these foundational principles, because everything's energy. And so when we are working from this place of harmony and beauty and tending to all the different aspects of a chain of energy, like a supply chain, like a exchange of goods, whatever it is, when everything is well cared for, tended to, and in balance and harmony, then the energy can flow with ease and grace. And so that's been the foundation from which we've grown our platform. And it's what I attribute our success and our impact to over the years, and really the catalyst for our growth and continued evolution.
I love it. I love it, Mariah. We're right at time right now. I think we're gonna have to do another episode. So I'll schedule that with you once we jump off here. So thank you so much for coming on. I'm excited to continue the conversation, and it's been an honor to have you on.
Oh,
Until
thank you
next
so
time.
much, Peter. Beautiful. Until next time. Looking forward to it.
Thank you. Take care.